I was just supposed to swap out a blown breaker panel at a $10 million penthouse. That was the job. But when the heir to Moreau Logistics pinned me against the drywall, burying his face in my neck like I was his only lifeline, the real blackout began. If you want to survive in the Chicago trades as an Omega, you learn to become a ghost. My name is Oliver Hayes. I'm 26, a licensed journeyman electrician, and for the last 4 years, I've been living a chemical lie. Every morning at 5 a.m., I'd dry swallow 2 heavy-duty inhibitol XR pills, black market suppressants, that stripped away my natural scent and flattened my biology to mimic a beta. The construction sites, the union halls, the cramped utility closets, they were no place for an Omega. If the alpha foreman even caught a whiff of amber and black tea, my natural scent, I'd be off the payroll faster than a blown fuse. I worked for Gary Wilkins at Metro City Electrical. Gary was a gruff, chain-smoking beta who didn't care about anything except getting the job done on time. It was a Tuesday night, November 12th, the kind of freezing, sleet-heavy night where the wind off Lake Michigan feels like it's trying to snap your ribs. I had just clocked out my hands, calloused and freezing, when my burner phone buzzed. Hayes, Gary barked through the static. Emergency call. Axiom Heights, downtown. The penthouse. The whole unit lost power and the building manager is breathing down my neck. Time and a half if you get there in 20. I didn't want to go. My body was aching, and I was dangerously close to my cycle, meaning the suppressants were already working overtime, leaving me nauseous and exhausted. But I needed the overtime pay to afford my next batch of pills. "Send me the address," I muttered, throwing my tool belt back into the passenger seat of my beat-up Ford Transit. Axiom Heights was the kind of building where the lobby floors were imported Italian marble, and the security guards looked like ex-military contractors. I bypassed the front desk through the service elevator, hauling my 50-pound tool bag up to the 42nd floor. When the elevator doors slid open, it opened directly into the penthouse foyer. The place was pitch black, save for the ambient orange glow of the city lights filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was dead silent. But the moment I stepped off the carpet and onto the hardwood, the air hit me. Pheromones, thick, suffocating, and dripping with raw distress. It smelled like cracked cedar ozone and spilled scotch. It was an alpha's scent, but it wasn't aggressive or territorial. It was the scent of an alpha who was bleeding out emotionally. My own dormant Omega biology instantly flared in response, a biological instinct screaming at me to find the source and soothe it. I bit my lip hard enough to taste copper, forcing my focus back to my job. "Hello," I called out, clicking on my heavy-duty mag light. "Wilkins Electrical. I'm here to check the main panel." The beam of my flashlight swept across a sprawling, minimalist living room. Leather couches, a grand piano, and shattered glass everywhere. A crystal decanter lay in pieces against the far wall, a puddle of expensive amber liquid soaking into an imported rug. "I told you to leave!" A voice rasped from the shadows. I swung the flashlight. Sitting on the floor, leaning heavily against the base of a massive marble fireplace, was a man. Even in the dark, disheveled and broken, I recognized him from the Forbes magazines tossed around the union break room. Declan Moreau, heir to Moreau Logistics, a multi-billion-dollar freight and shipping empire. He was 28, notoriously private, and currently looking like he had been put through a shredder. His expensive tailored suit jacket was discarded, his tie hung loosely around his neck, and his knuckles were bruised and bleeding. "Mr. Moreau," I kept my voice perfectly level, falling back on my professional beta facade. "I'm the electrician. Building management called. I just need to check your breaker box and I'll be out of your hair." Declan didn't look at me. His eyes were glazed, staring at the floor. "They cut it," he mumbled, his voice thick with a strange, delirious grief. "He cut the power. He's trying to freeze me out. Literally. I frowned, stepping closer, my boots crunching on a piece of broken glass. Who cut it? Suddenly Declan lunged. I didn't even have time to drop my flashlight. In a fraction of a second, 190 pounds of pure alpha muscle slammed into me. I hit the drywall hard, the breath rushing out of my lungs in a sharp gasp. I expected a punch, a violent outburst, the kind of feral rage alphas were known for when pushed to the edge. But the blow never came. Instead, Declan's arms wrapped around me with a crushing, desperate grip. He buried his face deep into the crook of my neck, right over my scent gland. His massive frame was violently trembling. "Don't go," he whispered, his voice cracking into a ragged sob. "Please don't leave me. They all leave. He took everything. Don't let him take this too." He was holding me like I was family. Like I was the last piece of driftwood in a hurricane. I stood frozen against the wall, my heavy leather tool belt digging into my hips, an heir to $1 billion throne clinging to my cheap flannel shirt. And then the worst possible thing happened. Beneath his nose, hidden under layers of sweat and cheap cologne, the chemical dam of my inhibitol XR began to crack under the pressure of an alpha's direct physical contact. "Mr. Moreau," I choked out, trying to pry his broad shoulders away from me. "You need to let go. I'm just here to fix the power." "It's cold," Declan murmured completely, ignoring my words. He was delirious, likely running a stress-induced fever, or perhaps slipping into the early disjointed phases of an unpartnered rut. His nose brushed against the sensitive skin of my neck, and a heavy shudder ripped through him. "You smell safe. You smell like home." Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. He could smell it. The amber, the black tea, the omega. I smell like copper wire and cheap coffee. I lied through my teeth, shoving him back with all the strength I could muster. The shove worked, but only because he let me go. Declan stumbled back, hitting the edge of the leather sofa. He looked up at me, his striking grey eyes blown wide, the pupils dilated to the edge of his irises. The fog of his breakdown seemed to lift just a fraction, replaced by a deep, predatory confusion. I didn't wait for him to process what he was smelling. I practically sprinted to the utility closet, tucked behind the kitchen. I threw the door open, propped my mag light between my teeth, and yanked the cover off the 200-amp service panel. I needed to fix this in 3 minutes and get out of this penthouse before my scent flooded the room. But as the beam of my flashlight hit the internal wiring, my stomach plummeted. This wasn't a tripped breaker. It wasn't a blown fuse or a faulty transformer. The thick, black 4-0 copper cables feeding the main power into the apartment hadn't just failed. They had been cleanly, deliberately severed. The insulation was stripped back, and the copper was sheared off with heavy-duty insulated bolt cutters. "What the hell?" I muttered around the flashlight. "I told you." Declan's voice drifted from the kitchen entrance. I whipped around. He was leaning against the doorframe, his breathing heavy, his eyes locked onto me with an unblinking intensity. "It wasn't an accident. Somebody broke into your utility closet and cut your mains," I said, dropping the flashlight into my hand. "Mr. Moreau, this is a crime scene. I can't fix this with a spare fuse. You need an entirely new main feed, pulled from the floor below. You need to call the police." Declan let out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed in the dark, empty kitchen. "The police? Who do you think paid the building's security to look the other way? While someone came up here with bolt cutters? Who?" My father, Declan, spat the words like venom. "Roman Moreau." I froze. Roman Moreau was a titan in Chicago. He was the CEO of Moreau Logistics, a man known for crushing unions and destroying rival companies. "I don't understand," I said, wiping a bead of sweat from my forehead. The room was cold, but I was burning up. The adrenaline was metabolizing my suppressants at double speed. I refused to merge my independent tech freight division into his umbrella. Declan explained, his voice growing dangerously low as he took a slow step into the kitchen. He gave me an ultimatum today. I told him to go to hell. So he froze my bank accounts. He locked me out of the company's servers. And now he's cutting the power to the apartment he technically still owns on paper, trying to freeze me out like a rat in the walls. That's insane, I whispered. He's your father. He's an alpha who demands absolute submission, Declan countered, taking another step closer. The gap between us was closing, 10 feet, 8 feet. And I refused to submit. My heart was hammering against my ribs. The scent of ozone and cedar in the room was growing thicker, shifting from distress to something much darker, much more primal. Declan was angry. His alpha instincts, battered by his father's psychological warfare, were searching for a way to assert control, to find grounding. And he was looking right at me. "Listen, man," I said, holding my hands up defensively, my voice trembling slightly. "I'm sorry about your family drama, but I can't fix this tonight. I need to go down to my truck, put in a requisition for 40 wire, and come back tomorrow. I'm leaving." I moved to push past him toward the hallway. Declan's hand shot out, wrapping around my wrist like a steel vice. The contact sent a jolt of pure electricity straight down to my toes. My Omega biology practically purred at the dominant touch, and I hated myself for it. "You can't leave," Declan said softly. "Let go of me," I warned, trying to yank my arm back. He didn't budge. "No, you literally can't leave." Declan clarified his thumb, brushing over the erratic pulse at my wrist. He nodded toward the foyer. When the main power was cut, the penthouse's electronic security doors automatically engaged the lockdown protocol. It's an anti-theft measure. The only way to open them is with a master override from the building's server downstairs, a server my father currently controls. I stared at him, the blood draining from my face. "You're saying we're locked in until morning, when his lawyers arrive to serve me eviction papers," Declan said. A wave of dizzying heat washed over me. I pulled my wrist free, stumbling back against the kitchen island. I was trapped in a pitch-black, freezing apartment with a deeply traumatized, highly volatile alpha. But that wasn't the worst part. A sharp cramp twisted in my lower abdomen, radiating outward. My skin felt like it was on fire. The heavy, undeniable scent of vanilla amber and black tea suddenly bloomed in the stale air of the kitchen, rich and sweet and completely unhidden. My suppressants hadn't just cracked. They had completely dissolved. Declan stopped breathing. I watched in terror as his posture entirely changed. The broken, defeated air vanished. His shoulders squared, his chest expanded, and a low, resonant rumble vibrated in his throat, a sound purely instinctual, a sound an alpha makes when they realize there is an omega in heat in their territory. "You," Declan breathed, his eyes darkening from grey to black as he took a slow, predatory step towards me. "You're an omega. Stay back." I choked out my voice, betraying the tremor in my hands. I reached blindly behind me, my fingers closing around the cold, rubberized handle of a heavy flathead screwdriver from my tool belt. It was a pathetic weapon against an alpha of his size, but my survival instincts were warring with my biology. Every cell in my body was screaming at me to bare my neck to let the alpha smother the agonizing burn of my heat. Declan stopped dead in his tracks. The feral, pitch-black hunger in his eyes hit a wall of sudden, agonizing clarity when he saw the screwdriver trembling in my grip. He looked at my weapon, then at my terrified face, and a violent shudder wrecked his massive frame. He was fighting his own biology. I'm not my father. Declan gritted out his voice, a gravelly, strained rasp. He took a deliberate, agonizing step backward, raising both of his hands in surrender. He squeezed his eyes shut, his jaw ticking, as he fought to lock his alpha dominance back in its cage. I'm not going to touch you. I swear to God I won't touch you. Put it down, please. My knees buckled. Without the chemical barrier of the inhibitol XR, the sudden drop in temperature inside the penthouse clashed violently with the roaring fever of my heat. I slid down the front of the kitchen island, the screwdriver clattering uselessly against the hardwood floor. I wrapped my arms around my chest, shivering uncontrollably, while sweat dripped down the back of my neck. It's the cold. I gasped, my vision blurring at the edges. My suppressants. They metabolized too fast because of the adrenaline. I wasn't supposed to cycle for another week. Declan didn't hesitate. He stripped off his ruined expensive suit jacket and approached me slowly, telegraphing every movement like he was approaching a wounded animal. He knelt a few feet away and slid the heavy wool jacket across the floor. Put that on, he commanded softly. The scent of ozone and cedar rolling off him was no longer jagged with distress. It was thickening into something deeply protective, a rich grounding blanket of spiced wood. I need to start a fire. The ambient temperature is dropping too fast. If we stay in the dark, you'll go into thermal shock. I pulled the jacket around my shoulders. It smelled intensely of him. And the moment the fabric touched my nose, a humiliating whimper tore from my throat. My Omega biology eagerly leaned into the scent of a strong alpha offering protection. For the next 20 minutes, Declan tore apart a custom-built mahogany coffee table with his bare hands, breaking the expensive wood over his knee to build a fire in the massive living room hearth. The orange flames finally pushed back the oppressive darkness, casting long dancing shadows across the shattered glass and imported rugs. He sat down on the far side of the fire, keeping a respectful distance, though his eyes never left me. "How long have you been hiding?" Declan asked, quietly, tossing another splintered table leg into the flames. 4 years, I muttered, pulling my knees to my chest. The heat from the fire was helping soothing the sharpest edges of my cramps. The electrical union doesn't hire Omegas. They think we're a liability. Too fragile for heavy rigging, too distracting for the betas and alphas on site. I needed the pension. I needed the medical insurance. So I became a beta. Declan stared at the fire, the orange light flickering over his bruised knuckles. We both spend our lives pretending to be something we aren't just to survive the people in charge. Why did he really cut your power, Declan? I asked, using his first name without thinking. You're a billionaire. If he wanted to seize your assets, he has lawyers, cutting a main line with bolt cutters. That's a thug's move. That's vandalism. Declan's head snapped toward me, his grey eyes catching the firelight. Because it's not about the apartment. It's about the server room. He pointed down the dark, sweeping hallway. My independent tech freight division, the one I refused to surrender to him, runs on a localized proprietary server bank in the guest wing. It requires a massive amount of climate control to keep the processes from melting down. He didn't just cut the power to freeze me out, he cut the power to kill the cooling units. Without the main line, the backup battery for the servers will drain in exactly 3 hours. Once it dies, the servers fry. He destroys my company without leaving a digital footprint of corporate sabotage. I stared at him, my mind racing through the brain fog of my heat. A server bank that size. It has to have an emergency fail-safe, a secondary generator. It does, Declan said bitterly. On the roof. But the automatic transfer switch is tied into the main panel you just looked at, the one he destroyed. The generator won't kick on because the switch doesn't know the power is out. A spark of pure professional adrenaline cut through my fever. I was an Omega in heat, sitting in a billionaire's ruined penthouse, but I was also a damn good electrician. I can bypass it, I said, pushing myself up on shaky legs. Declan stood up instantly, closing the distance between us before catching himself. Oliver, no. You can barely stand. You're burning up. If I don't bypass that switch, your father wins, I said, grabbing my heavy tool bag from the foyer. My hands were trembling, but my grip on my wire strippers was firm. I need you to carry me down that hall if I fall, and I need you to hold the flashlight. Can you do that? Declan looked at me, a profound, undeniable awe washing over his features. The protective instinct in his scent flared, wrapping around me like a physical shield. Yes. Tell me what to do. The server room was suffocatingly hot. The cooling units had been dead for hours, and the air hummed with the desperate whining fans of the server racks, fighting a losing battle. The temperature was easily pushing 90 degrees, which was absolute hell on my already spiking internal body temperature. I was on my knees in front of the secondary sub-panel, my hands slick with sweat. Declan was kneeling right behind me, his chest pressed firmly against my back to keep me upright, his broad hands resting on my hips to steady my shaking frame. It was agonizingly intimate. The scent of our distress had completely blended, filling the small utility closet with a rich, dizzying mix of amber tea and cedar. My breathing was coming in short, ragged gasps, but I couldn't stop. I stripped the thick insulation off the 2-gauge copper wire, my crimping tool biting into the metal. Almost there, I whispered, panting. I have to bridge the hot leg of the generator directly to the server bus bar. When I tell you, you need to flip that red breaker on the wall. If I don't pull my hands back in time, it'll throw me across the room. I'm not risking your life for a server, Oliver. Declan growled his alpha instincts, rejecting the danger. His grip on my hips tightened. Stop! Let it burn! I didn't come up 42 floors to fail a job. I snapped, leaning into the panel. Get ready. I shoved the thick copper leads into the exposed lugs, gripping the insulated handles of my pliers with everything I had. Now, Declan, hit it! Clack. The heavy breaker slammed home. A massive spark showered over my gloves, and the heavy thrum of 240 volts ripped through the wiring. I threw myself backward, directly into Declan's arms. Above us, the massive industrial cooling units roared to life. Cold, beautiful, glorious air blasted down from the ceiling vents. We collapsed onto the floor of the server room, a tangle of limbs and heavy breathing. I was straddling his lap, completely exhausted, my head resting heavily against his chest. His heart was pounding like a jackhammer beneath my ear. Declan's arms wrapped tightly around me, not with the frantic desperation from earlier, but with a firm, absolute certainty. He buried his nose into my scent gland, inhaling deeply. You saved me, he whispered, his lips brushing against my damp skin. You saved everything. Time and a half, I mumbled deliriously, letting my eyes drift shut as his scent finally pulled me into a heavy, secure rest. The next few hours were a blur of sleep heat and the comforting weight of a protector who refused to let me go. But the sanctuary couldn't last forever. At 6 a.m., the heavy electronic locks on the penthouse foyer echoed with a loud beep. The doors slid open. Declan and I were standing in the living room waiting. I was wearing his oversized sweater, my tool belt strapped securely around my waist, my heat stabilized by his constant grounding physical presence. Roman Moreau walked in, flanked by 2 corporate lawyers and a building security manager. He was a tall, imposing alpha with cold eyes and a cruel smirk. The smirk vanished the moment he saw the lights on in the hallway and heard the hum of the servers. What the hell is this? Roman barked, his oppressive alpha pheromones flooding the room. Declan stepped slightly in front of me, shielding me from the hostile wave. It's over, Roman. Over. Roman sneered, his eyes darting to me. You hired a beta mechanic to illegally bypass building safety grids. I'll have his union license revoked, and you thrown out on the street. I own this building. I own the power. Actually, I spoke up, my voice steady, surprising even myself. I pulled a small black device from my tool bag and tossed it onto the kitchen island. It was my union-mandated work tablet. As a licensed journeyman, I'm required to photograph and document all major electrical hazards before rendering aid. I tapped the screen. A high-definition photo of the severed cables appeared, clearly showing the clean, professional cuts of an insulated tool. I also pulled the digital lock logs from the sub-basement utility room, using my tablet's diagnostic bridge. I continued smoothly. The room was accessed by a master key code registered directly to Roman Morrow at 10:14 p.m. last night. You didn't just turn off the power. You maliciously destroyed critical infrastructure to sabotage a rival company's data center. Roman's face drained of color. The lawyers beside him shifted uncomfortably, suddenly realizing they were standing in the middle of a federal corporate espionage crime scene. That's a felony, Declan said, his voice ringing with absolute, unshakable authority. And when I take this to the board of directors this afternoon, they aren't just going to vote you out. They're going to hand you to the SEC on a silver platter. Roman opened his mouth to shout to dominate, but Declan's alpha presence finally broke free. It crashed through the room, a massive, suffocating wave of power that forced even the security guard to take a step back. "Get out of my house!" Declan roared. 10 minutes later, the penthouse was empty again. The silence was different this time. It wasn't broken. It was victorious. Declan turned to me, the ferocious alpha dropping away, leaving only the man who had held me through the darkest hours of the night. He reached out gently, tracing the line of my jaw. "You don't ever have to hide again, Oliver," he said softly. "You don't need the suppressants. You don't need to fight alone. Quit the union. Come work for me. Stay with me." I looked into his grey eyes, feeling the undeniable magnetic pull of the bond that had forged between us in the cold and the dark. I went to that apartment to fix the wiring, expecting another miserable night in a life of hiding. But the CEO's son had grabbed me like I was his only family in the world, and as I leaned up to press my lips against his, finally letting my true scent bloom without fear, I realized something beautiful. We actually were one. Did you love this intense Omegaverse drama? If Oliver and Declan's story kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and share this video with your fellow romance lovers. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our thrilling real-life stories and spicy twists. Drop a comment below telling us what you would do in Oliver's shoes. Stay tuned for more, and thanks for watching our channel.